You step into a world where the air feels charged, as though every conversation carries a hidden weight. The story has already been whispered to you before sleep, though not in the way it reached the headlines. It began with someone who seemed destined for promise, someone whose life carried both admiration and envy in equal measure. You sense immediately that this person's rise through the ranks, whether in influence, talent, or simply by proximity to power, made them both beloved and despised. You walk in their shadow now, retracing the path of their final days, trying to capture the unease that crept in before the storm broke. The murmurs started subtly, like small cracks in glass. At first, only a few people noticed the long hours they kept, the way they appeared suddenly worn down, their smile not quite touching their eyes anymore. Then came the first undeniable sign: strange meetings, secretive exchanges, and the heavy glance of people who knew more than they would ever admit. You are there, standing just behind the curtain, overhearing fragments, a name whispered, a warning delivered in a hushed tone, the sensation that something fragile is about to collapse. Everywhere you turn, the weight of expectation presses in. Friends notice the change, but pretend not to. Associates feign loyalty while quietly gossiping in private. You sense how quickly admiration transforms into sharpened curiosity and then suspicion. In the late hours, you picture them sitting alone, staring at papers or photographs, perhaps rehearsing words they'll never get to say. It's as though they carried knowledge too dangerous to hold and yet impossible to let go. The tension spreads outward like ripples in a pond. You can hear how the media circles closer, like vultures sensing a wound before blood has even touched the ground. Their interest sharpens with every whisper, every rumor. Journalists pry into details of private life, digging for scandal, for cracks in a polished image. Each column inch feels like pressure applied to the chest, a weight that grows heavier with every headline. You are drawn into their inner world, feeling the constant hum of dread beneath the noise. It's not only the press. Powerful figures loom like shadows in a dim hallway, watching carefully, speaking even less. To them, this figure was useful when obedient, disposable when unruly. That is the cruel bargain of visibility. When you step into the light, you cast a longer shadow, and those in power always know how to use both. You notice how cold the air feels whenever their name is mentioned in such company, how carefully conversations shift, how quickly silence descends. The person at the center of it all seemed both aware and overwhelmed. They carried themselves with dignity, but you can sense the strain behind their movements, the sleepless nights stitched into the fabric of their days. They confided in almost no one, and when they did, it was in cryptic words that seemed to reveal nothing and everything at once. To one friend, "It's bigger than me." To another, "If anything happens, remember I told you." Words like warnings, disguised as casual remarks, left dangling for others to puzzle over only after it was far too late. As you walk further down this path, the city around you changes. It's as though everyone knew something was about to happen, yet no one wanted to admit it. The laughter in cafes felt strained. The clink of glasses in restaurants carried a hollow sound. Strangers exchanged brief, knowing glances when their name came up, then quickly moved on, unwilling to linger. You can feel the storm gathering, its winds tugging at everything fragile, waiting to tear it apart. And then there were the unexplained moments, the ones that seem ordinary on the surface but pulse with unease when revisited. A phone call cut short when someone walked into the room, a driver seen waiting outside at odd hours. A letter torn into pieces before anyone could read it. Each fragment is meaningless on its own, but together they sketch a portrait of mounting fear. You imagine what it must have been like for them in those last days, lying awake at night, the ceiling above turning into a blank canvas for worries and half-formed plans. Perhaps they wondered if escape was possible. Perhaps they believed exposure would bring protection. Or perhaps, deep down, they knew they were already caught in a web too tight to break. You sense their isolation acutely, as though you are sitting across from them in a dimly lit room, their eyes tired, their voice hushed, their thoughts racing beyond reach. By now, the world around them was already watching, some out of concern, many out of curiosity, and others out of malice. Every whisper carried weight, every silence felt suspicious. You can hear the low hum of gossip spreading through corridors of power and trickling down into living rooms and taverns. The storm had not yet struck, but its electricity was everywhere, impossible to ignore. You are left holding the tension as tightly as they must have, knowing something irreversible looms just ahead. The whispers had grown into a chorus, but no one could yet predict the exact moment the silence would finally shatter. You find yourself standing on the threshold of that fateful night, the one where every detail feels suspended in time. The world outside continues as usual, streets lit by sodium lamps, restaurants buzzing, the faint hum of traffic, but you know that within the frame of this evening, something irreversible will occur. You feel the dissonance keenly, how ordinary it seemed to anyone not looking closely, and how heavy with premonition it feels when revisited now. The day had unfolded in fragments that, in retrospect, appear like warning signs. You see them pacing a room, answering calls that left their face drawn and pale. You hear the tone of clipped conversations, firm, almost desperate. A notebook lies open on the desk, scribbled with notes that trail into nothing. They had a meeting scheduled, but never showed. They had a dinner planned, but canceled last minute. To those around them, these were small inconsistencies. To you, retracing their final hours, they are alarm bells. As night fell, the city itself seemed to press in. You picture the roads slick with rain, headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt, and the air carrying that distinct smell of damp pavement. They were last seen stepping out of a car, or perhaps into one, depending on which account you believe. The witnesses contradict each other, and even the clocks disagree on the time. What is certain, however, is that by the end of that night, their life would be extinguished in circumstances so strange they would ignite a storm of speculation. You move closer, following the timeline as though pressing your ear against the walls of memory. At some point, they were alone, whether by choice or by manipulation, no one can say. A phone call pinged from their device around 9:47 p.m., lasting less than 30 seconds. The words on the other end have never been made public. A neighbor swears they heard raised voices, though later retracted the claim under unclear pressure. A light was seen flickering in the room where they stayed, then darkness. And then the discovery. It was not dramatic, not immediate. Hours passed before anyone realized something was wrong. When the door was finally opened, silence greeted those who entered. You feel the weight of that stillness pressing against you, the kind of silence that doesn't merely fill a room, but suffocates it. They were found in a position that suggested no easy explanation, a scene too neat in some ways and too chaotic in others. The objects on the table looked arranged, almost staged, while personal items lay scattered, as if snatched in haste. The first whispers of foul play spread within minutes of the discovery. Authorities, eager to maintain calm, offered a swift explanation, one that pointed toward personal struggle, despair, or accident. But you can sense as you lean into the story how poorly this explanation fit the details. Too many inconsistencies, too many unanswered questions. Their friends recoiled in disbelief, swearing that they had no reason to give up on life. Colleagues, wary but firm, insisted there were forces that wanted them silent. The public, always hungry for drama, clung to every contradiction. You picture the room as investigators cataloged it, their gloves rustling against paper and glass, their voices low. Every item, every trace carried meaning that night. A glass with fingerprints smudged half off, a note torn into strips too small to read, a locked drawer forced open, its contents gone. The puzzle pieces lie scattered, and yet the official story insisted no puzzle existed at all. And then, as quickly as the story began, the scene was sealed. Within hours, officials declared it resolved, the tragedy of a troubled figure whose demons had caught up with them. But you know that this abrupt closure only deepened suspicion. Why the rush? Why deny the possibility of something darker? As you sit in the silence of that night, you feel how hollow the explanation sounds, how strained the narrative becomes when pressed against the facts. The aftermath of discovery bled into the dawn. Reporters gathered outside the building before the body had even been removed. Cameras flashed, neighbors peeked from windows, and the story spilled into headlines before the family could even comprehend their loss. To those who loved them, grief collided with fury. To those in power, inconvenience collided with opportunity. And to the public, a mystery had just been born. That night refuses to fade. It lingers like smoke, clinging to every retelling. You can still hear the confusion in the voices of those who arrived first, the disbelief in the words of those who identified the body, the quiet fury in the whispers of those who insisted this was no accident. You feel yourself drawn back into the room again and again, trying to make sense of the arrangement, the contradictions, the silence. And just as you think you might piece it together, the details blur. Official records contradict eyewitness accounts. The timeline shifts depending on who you ask. The objects in the room mean everything or nothing at all. You are left standing in the echo of that night, carrying the same unease that spread across the nation when the story first broke. Something terrible happened here, but the truth lies buried beneath layers of silence and manipulation. The night changed everything, not just for the figure at its center, but for everyone who lived in the shadow of what came next. It marked the moment when whispers turned into questions too loud to ignore, when grief became outrage, and when a private tragedy became a national scandal. You move deeper now, past the immediate shock of that night and into the shadows that stretched behind it. The moment of discovery may have been chaotic, but what followed was far more insidious. The careful closing of doors, the tightening of lips, the secrets hidden away where light was not allowed to reach. You sense it immediately, the way silence seemed orchestrated, not accidental. Behind closed doors, whispers turned sharper. Meetings were held in hushed tones, with curtains drawn and phones placed face down on polished wooden tables. The figure's death was spoken of as a tragedy, a word meant to soothe, but you notice the unease in every face that utters it. For some, it was relief disguised as grief. For others, it was an opportunity to bury more than just a body. And for a few, it was a chilling reminder of what happens when secrets grow too large. The connections begin to reveal themselves slowly, as though tugged out from beneath a rug. You learn of dealings they were privy to, agreements signed in smoke-filled rooms, favors exchanged without documentation, and promises whispered where microphones couldn't reach. Their life had intersected with the powerful in ways few realized until it was too late. You can feel how dangerous this knowledge was, how heavy it must have weighed on them, and how inevitable the consequences became once they stopped being silent. In one folder of forgotten correspondence, there are references to money that moved in untraceable channels, slipping through hands like water. In another, notes about names that should never be spoken aloud. You imagine them sitting with these files, their heart racing as they debated whether to reveal the truth or hold it close. Each piece of evidence was a spark, and together it was enough to ignite an inferno. But power does not burn quietly. Those who live in its glow know how to extinguish flames before they spread. You can see how quickly narratives were shaped after the death, how certain papers carried identical headlines, as though written from a single script. Officials spoke with rehearsed sorrow, while behind the scenes, documents vanished. Witnesses who claimed to have seen or heard too much began to retract statements, their eyes darting nervously, their words suddenly vague. The more you look, the clearer it becomes that this was no isolated tragedy. The figure's demise threatened to pull threads that would unravel far larger tapestries. You hear names linked to theirs, business magnates, political players, even trusted advisors, each of whom had reason to silence questions before they began. Every connection forms a knot, every knot tied tighter with denial. You imagine the rooms where this control was enforced, conference tables stretching the length of the room, men and women in suits leaning forward, speaking in coded language. Containment, one might say. Optics, another. Words that strip humanity from death, turning it into something to manage rather than mourn. You hear the metallic ring of decision-making, cold and calculated. What mattered now was not what had happened, but how it would be remembered or erased. Yet even within these walls, there were fractures. A few voices urged caution, warning that too much suppression would only feed suspicion. Others argued for swift and brutal closure, the kind that leaves no trace behind. You can feel the tension between them, the fear that if the truth surfaced, it would not simply stain reputations, but collapse entire empires. Outside those rooms, the family struggled with grief compounded by confusion. They asked questions, only to receive rehearsed answers. They sought clarity, only to find more contradictions. You can sense their frustration, their helplessness in the face of power that bends facts as easily as paper. Friends of the deceased spoke in riddles, hinting at dangers, but never daring to name them aloud. One whispered, "They knew too much." Another muttered, "This was never about them, it was about what they stood in the way of." The deeper you walk, the more suffocating the silence becomes. It is not the natural quiet of grief, but the engineered hush of fear. You can feel how every locked drawer, every missing page, every retracted testimony feeds into something larger than a single death. This was not just about a person, it was about a system built on secrets too fragile to survive exposure. And yet, secrets have a way of slipping through cracks. Small details emerged despite the efforts to bury them. A financial record misplaced in an archive, a witness too stubborn to remain silent, a photograph that appeared at the wrong time. These fragments spread like embers, never quite igniting the full blaze, but glowing enough to illuminate the outlines of something monstrous. As you sit with these pieces, you feel a chill crawl through you. This death was not an isolated tragedy, not the random cruelty of fate. It was the product of pressure, of proximity to truths too volatile to survive disclosure. They had stumbled too close to a vault of power, and the vault had closed on them. The truth is there, lingering like a presence just outside the frame of sight. You can feel it breathing down your neck, whispering that the story is bigger than what you've been told. And with every secret uncovered, the scandal grows louder, impossible to contain behind even the heaviest of doors. You step into the aftermath now, where the private whispers have spilled into the streets, and silence can no longer hold back the noise. The public has awakened, and what began as hushed suspicion has become a roar of outrage. You can feel the shift immediately. Where once conversations dipped into shadows, now they burst into daylight, carried on airwaves, printed on front pages, and shouted in crowded squares. It begins with disbelief. The official story, neat and polished, feels brittle under scrutiny. Citizens replay the timeline, analyze photographs, and argue over inconsistencies. They refuse to accept what they're told because too much doesn't add up. And as you listen, you hear how grief transforms into fury. People who never met the figure speak of betrayal, of being lied to, of the sense that their lives are entangled in something rotten at the highest levels. The scandal spreads like fire. Every newspaper headline sharpens its edges. Every broadcast leans in with dramatic tones. Unanswered questions, shadows of corruption, the case that refuses to close. You can hear anchors emphasizing every pause, making the nation lean forward, hungry for more. And with every retelling, more doubt seeps into the collective mind. The death is no longer a single person's tragedy. It has become a mirror held up to an entire system. Crowds gather, candlelight vigils transform into demonstrations, then into marches. You see faces illuminated in flickering light, some streaked with tears, others hardened with anger. Placards rise into the night sky. Justice delayed is justice denied. We deserve the truth. The chants echo through the streets, rising and falling like waves, each one carrying the weight of a people who feel betrayed. You walk among them, and the energy hums through your bones. In homes across the country, dinner tables become battlegrounds of speculation. Families argue over motives, over suspects, over the meaning of silence from those in power. Radios buzz with callers demanding accountability. Letters pour into newspapers, voices once quiet now shouting into print. The story has breached every wall, infecting every conversation. No one is untouched by it. And still, the authorities cling to their version, their rehearsed sorrow. Officials step to podiums with expressions carved from stone, repeating phrases that sound emptier each time. Tragic loss, no foul play, case closed. But the more they insist, the louder the opposition grows. You sense the distrust deepening, a canyon opening between those who govern and those they claim to serve. For those in power, the scandal becomes an inconvenience they cannot contain. Politicians dodge questions, spokespeople stammer, and documents that were once sealed find their way into the hands of investigative journalists. Each revelation feeds the fury. Proof of meetings denied, evidence withheld, testimonies altered. Every fragment that leaks feels like a shard of glass, sharp enough to cut through the official narrative. The media, once cautious, now surges forward. You hear the passion in investigative voices, the tremble in their delivery as they reveal pieces of the puzzle. Some speak with courage, others with caution, but all contribute to the growing storm. The story is no longer about a single person's death. It is about the integrity of a nation's conscience. The scandal infiltrates art, music, even whispered jokes in smoky bars. Cartoonists sketch grotesque caricatures of leaders. Poets write verses about silenced voices. Musicians turn chants from the protests into anthems. The death, tragic as it was, has become fuel for expression, for solidarity, for rebellion. But with outrage comes danger. Protesters are watched, some followed, a few silenced in subtle ways. Whistleblowers vanish from the headlines. Journalists receive threats cloaked as warnings. You can feel the tension rising like a wire pulled tighter and tighter. The more people demand answers, the more forcefully those answers are denied. And yet, denial only breeds more suspicion. You stand in the thick of it now, surrounded by a sea of restless voices. It feels less like a nation in mourning and more like a nation on trial. Every chant, every demand, every tear-streaked face pushes the scandal forward, refusing to let it die as neatly as the figure it began with. It is in this chaos that legends are born, rumors become gospel, theories harden into belief. To some, the figure is a martyr, silenced for daring to speak. To others, they are a symbol of fragility, crushed beneath the weight of power. And to all, they are no longer just an individual. They are a story too vast to be contained by one life or one death. The scandal has erupted, and there is no returning to silence. You feel the nation's pulse racing faster, its breath catching in its throat. The death that began in shadows has now lit a fire too large to extinguish. You step into the final stretch of this story, where the dust of outrage settles not into calm, but into a strange, uneasy permanence. The truth remains elusive, buried under contradictions and silences, but the figure at the center has already transcended their mortal existence. They are no longer simply who they were in life. They have become legend, symbol, cautionary tale. You can feel it as you move through the aftermath, the way every telling bends the story, the way every silence reshapes it. The official narrative persists, brittle yet stubborn. Authorities repeat the same lines, as though repetition itself could carve truth into stone. They cling to the story of despair, of accident, of inevitability. But the more they insist, the hollower it sounds, like an echo in a cavern too vast to be contained. The documents are sealed, the files locked away. The voices that might have spoken have either fallen silent or disappeared. To those in power, the case is closed. To the people, it has only just begun. You can feel how memory mutates in the years that follow. Some whisper conspiracies, claiming the death was orchestrated by a hidden hand that feared exposure. Others weave tales of escape, believing the figure staged their own demise and lives on in shadow. The theories multiply, becoming part of the cultural fabric, passed along not as speculation, but as inherited truth. At kitchen tables, in bars, in classrooms, the question lingers: what really happened? Monuments appear, small at first, a mural on a crumbling wall, a candle left burning on an anniversary night. Then larger gestures follow, public squares renamed, speeches delivered, documentaries produced. The death becomes less about loss and more about what it revealed, what it symbolized. For many, the figure embodies the courage to stand near truth even when truth destroys. For others, they are a reminder of fragility, of how quickly one can be silenced when standing too close to power. You walk through this legacy and feel the paradox it carries. The person themselves is gone, but their absence has created something larger, louder, more enduring. In their silence, they speak more forcefully than ever before. They haunt the conscience of a nation, not with fear, but with a reminder that questions cannot be buried forever. And yet, the truth remains obscured. Files sit in archives, marked for release decades from now, perhaps long after those who remember have faded. Witnesses grow old, their memories blurring, their testimonies softened into half-truths. The scandal that once consumed every headline begins to shift into folklore, a story retold with embellishments, with omissions, with interpretations that reveal more about the teller than the event itself. Still, the mystery persists. It breathes in the spaces between conversations, in the pauses before someone changes the subject, in the unease that lingers when the name is spoken. You sense that it will never fade entirely. Some stories resist resolution, clinging to uncertainty as though the ambiguity itself is what gives them life. And so, you are left here in the twilight of the tale, holding fragments that will never quite fit together. A life ended too soon, a scandal too large to contain, a truth buried beneath layers of denial and legend. You feel the weight of it pressing against your chest, not as despair, but as a reminder. The line between fact and fiction is often drawn not by evidence, but by power. The mysterious death has become more than a question mark. It has become a mirror, reflecting the fears, hopes, and doubts of everyone who dares to look. You close your eyes, and even in silence, you hear the echo of their story, unfinished, unresolved, unforgettable. And now, as the story drifts into quiet, you find yourself lying in the soft glow of thought, letting the echoes fade into the edges of sleep. The figure at the center is gone, their life fractured into whispers and their death carved into legend. But their presence lingers, like a shadow stretching far beyond its source. You realize that the scandal they sparked was never just about them. It was about what their story revealed, about power, about silence, about the fragile balance between truth and control. The unanswered questions remain, but perhaps that is the nature of mysteries too large to resolve. Not every truth can be wrestled into the light. Some remain buried, waiting for hands brave enough to uncover them, or perhaps destined never to be found. You sense that the weight of this story lies not in its resolution, but in its persistence, the way it refuses to be forgotten, the way it insists on being retold. And as you settle deeper into rest, you feel the story curl around you like a dark lullaby. It reminds you that behind every headline lies a heartbeat, behind every scandal, a human life. It asks you to remember not just the figure whose death lit a fire, but the countless others who walk in their shadow, unseen, unheard, carrying truths too dangerous to speak. The night holds these secrets close, cradling them in silence. And as you drift towards sleep, you carry with you the lesson whispered by this tale, that mysteries endure, legends grow, and some questions, once asked, will never again be silenced.